Daniel Marlowe, a wealthy entrepreneur, decided to test himself on an unusual evening. He brought his twin daughters along to what was supposed to be a date and disguised himself as nothing more than a broke single dad. Everything shifted the moment a stranger offered to cover the bill. "Wait, you actually brought kids to a date?" the hostess whispered, one eyebrow raised as she glanced at the squirming toddlers in his arms. "Yep," Daniel answered evenly, shifting a diaper bag higher on his shoulder. "Though, honestly, it's not really a date." The hostess looked doubtful, but finally motioned toward a small table near the window. "You're in luck. Only one reservation tonight with children. Table 5. Daniel nodded, feeling his pulse hammering faster than during any high-stakes boardroom negotiation. In his faded jeans and plain t-shirt, he was miles away from the polished billionaire that once graced the covers of financial magazines. His tailored suits and private driver were swapped tonight for an old 2008 Honda Civic, and the girls' curls were held up by mismatched hair ties. He set Sophie and Lily into booster seats. Lily immediately reached for the salt shaker, while Sophie clutched her pink stuffed bunny, scanning the room with wide eyes. Daniel took a deep breath and glanced at the door. He already knew the woman from the app wasn't coming. Her last message had been blunt. "Sorry, can't date a broke dad of 2. Good luck." He was just about to scoop up his daughters and leave when the front door opened and a young woman walked in. A canvas tote bag hung from her shoulder, and a paperback was tucked under her arm. She scanned the restaurant, checked her phone briefly, then fixed her gaze on his table. With a nervous smile, she walked straight toward them. "Hi, I'm Laura," she said, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Sorry I'm late. The bus crawled the whole way here." Daniel blinked in surprise. "I know, not exactly a dramatic entrance," she added quickly, sliding into the seat across from him. "But hey, you mentioned a window table and kids, so I figured this must be you." He opened his mouth to correct her, but then he really looked at her. There was a quiet sincerity in her eyes, a shy but disarming smile, and beneath it all, a kind of tiredness he understood all too well. "No problem," he said softly. "We just sat down." Laura turned to the girls, who stared at her with open curiosity. "Well, I didn't expect to dine with such distinguished company," she teased with a grin. "Do you like cats?" Lily asked, squinting at her. "More than I like most people," Laura chuckled. Sophie pushed a purple crayon across the table. "Draw one." And just like that, Laura grabbed a napkin and began sketching. Within minutes, the twins were giggling over her lopsided kitten drawing, completely enchanted. Daniel leaned back, astonished. The usual awkwardness of introducing someone new to his daughters was gone. This wasn't forced. It flowed naturally. Dinner came in a blur of chaos. Spaghetti sauce spattered across the table, orange juice tipped over, and napkins vanished one after another. Laura didn't flinch. She helped Lily wipe her chin and told a story about the time she tripped and landed face first in a birthday cake at the library. The girls laughed so hard they nearly toppled from their seats. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, something warm and unfamiliar. Laura never once asked about his job. She didn't mention money, success, or anything tied to the image the world knew. Instead, she asked Sophie about her favorite animal and listened intently to Lily's story about a magic rock she had found. And when Daniel caught her watching him, she smiled. Not flirtatiously, not coyly, but simply, genuinely. When the server placed the check on the table halfway through the meal, Daniel froze. His hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. These weren't his usual clothes. He wasn't even sure a wallet was in them. Panic flared in his chest. Laura noticed. She didn't make it awkward. Quietly, she pulled out a worn wallet, slid out a card, and handed it to the waiter with a calm smile. "It's fine," she said, brushing her hair back. "I've had worse dates." Daniel turned to her, stunned. "You didn't have to—" "I know," she interrupted gently, "but I wanted to. You looked like someone who just needed a little kindness." He fell silent. The chatter of the restaurant faded away. It wasn't about the money. He could buy the whole building if he wanted. It was about the way she saw him. Not the Daniel Marlowe of business headlines and shareholder meetings, but the man juggling booster seats and juice boxes. A man who was simply trying. He studied her more closely. The faint, tired lines around her eyes probably came from late nights spent with books, not parties. Her blouse was plain, her nails unpolished. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just there, present, human, kind. The restaurant slowly emptied, but their table remained alive, with crayons and laughter. Laura broke a breadstick in half, handed one piece to Sophie, and continued a story about her childhood. "I grew up in a house where money was always tight," she said, her voice carrying a distant note of memory. "But books filled every corner, stacked on shelves and piled on the floor. When the power went out, my mom would read to me by candlelight. That's why I became a librarian. Books made me feel rich, even when we had nothing else." Daniel listened carefully. There was no bitterness in her words, no regret over what she didn't have, only gratitude for what she did. And that struck him deeper than he expected. Most of Daniel's past dates had gone the same way. Questions about his vacation home in Aspen, the wines he collected, or how many luxury cars sat in his garage. But Laura never asked about any of that. She didn't care about his career, his bank account, or his lifestyle. She only seemed interested in him. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like someone actually saw the man beneath the headlines. "You must really love your job," he said quietly. Laura nodded. "I do. The kids who come in after school light up when I remember their names, or when I set aside a book I think they'll like. It may seem small, but I like to believe it makes a difference." Sophie leaned her head against Laura's arm. Laura gently brushed a crumb from the child's cheek and whispered, "These girls, they're something truly special." Daniel's throat tightened. "They are my whole world," he admitted. When dinner ended, he offered to walk Laura to the bus stop, or at least drive her there. "It's not a glamorous car," he said with a crooked smile, "but it gets us where we need to go." Laura hesitated, glanced toward the street. "It's okay," she said softly. "I like walking. Clears my head." He forced a nod. "Of course." She bent down, kissed Sophie on the forehead, and waved to the girls. "Thanks for the drawing, little artist." "Come draw again," Lily shouted after her. Laura's smile lingered. "Maybe," she said, before disappearing into the night. Daniel drove home in silence. The twins were already asleep in their car seats, their small hands still streaked with crayon marks. A napkin doodle fluttered on the dashboard, an uneven sketch of a cat with far too many whiskers, and the words "Laura" plus Sophie scribbled in crooked letters. He stared at it after pulling into the garage, his chest aching. The memory tugged him backward. Years ago, his late wife Emily had sat on the kitchen floor, drawing animals, with the girls on sheets of newspaper, laughter filling the room. That memory had haunted him ever since, making every new connection feel like betrayal. But tonight felt different. Watching Laura laugh as orange juice spilled down her sleeve, seeing her kneel to help his daughters without hesitation, It hadn't felt like guilt or fear. It had felt like peace. Maybe healing wasn't betrayal after all. Maybe it was permission to keep moving, to begin again. Daniel folded the crayon cat drawing carefully and placed it inside the glove box as though tucking away a fragile piece of hope. He didn't know if he'd ever see Laura again, but she had left something with him already, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. 4 days passed. 4 days since Laura had walked into the wrong date and completely undone him with crayons, spaghetti sauce, and sincerity. He couldn't shake her from his mind. Her laugh with the girls, the way she had paid the bill without hesitation, without judgment. All he had to hold on to was the one casual detail she had dropped. "I work at the library near Pine Street, the one with the red doors." On Saturday morning, Daniel buckled Sophie and Lily into the car and told himself it was just a casual visit. No expectations, no plan, just curiosity, and maybe a little hope. The library was easy to find. The red doors stood out on the block, and as soon as they stepped inside, the scent of old paper and polished wood wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Children sat cross-legged in a corner, clustered around a woman with a worn picture book in her lap. And then the bear said, "Who took my hat?" Laura's voice rose theatrically, sending the kids into a fit of giggles. Sophie gasped. "That's her," Lily clapped. "She's here." Before Daniel could stop them, the twins dashed forward, slipping between the other children to get closer. Laura paused mid-sentence, startled, and then slowly looked up. Her eyes widened when she spotted Daniel at the entrance, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, shoulders tense. "Hi," he said softly. Laura closed the book. "Okay, everyone, 5-minute break." The kids groaned, but shuffled off toward beanbags. She stood and walked toward him. "You found me." "I remembered what you said about the red doors," Daniel replied. Silence stretched between them, thick but not hostile. Sophie proudly held out a folded paper. "We made you another drawing." Laura took it with a tender smile. "Thank you, sweetheart." Then her gaze shifted back to Daniel. "You weren't the man I was supposed to meet that night." "No," he admitted. "You were waiting for someone else." She crossed her arms. "Then why did you stay?" Daniel drew in a breath. "Because I couldn't walk away. Not when someone finally looked at me. Not at Daniel Marlowe, the CEO, or the man with more money than sense. Just me. The dad trying to hold it all together. The widower who still misses his wife. The man who needed one night that wasn't a performance." Her lips parted, her expression unreadable. "I didn't lie," he added quickly. "I didn't pretend to be someone else. I just didn't correct you. Because for once, someone wasn't measuring me against wealth or status. You listened to my girls. You paid the bill without blinking. You laughed when things got messy." Laura's eyes softened. Daniel stepped closer. "My name is Daniel Marlowe," he said. "I run a company that probably built the donation boxes your library uses. I own too many suits and live in a house far too big for 3 people, and most days I hate it. But the other night, none of that mattered. Not because of me, but because of you." Laura glanced at the twins, who were flipping through books nearby, then lowered her gaze to the drawing in her hand. A cat with a crooked smile and a pink heart above its head. For Laura, the girls had scribbled in black crayon. "What I saw that night," she murmured, "was real. The way you looked at them, the way they looked at you, and the way you looked at me like it scared you. That wasn't fake." "It wasn't," he said firmly. She met his eyes again. "But I need time. Time to figure out what's real, when everything around you seems so complicated. He nodded. Take all the time you need. A long pause hung between them. Not a goodbye, not yet. And strangely, that was enough. In the days that followed, their encounters became small, quiet moments. Daniel began bringing the twins to the library more often, though he pretended it was spontaneous. Laura would always smile when she saw them, acting surprised. Once, they met at the park, the girls running barefoot through the grass, while Laura read aloud from a children's book. Daniel sat on a bench, watching her, realizing that somehow her presence made even an ordinary afternoon feel extraordinary. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just steady. One Friday evening, a folded note appeared in Laura's mailbox. The handwriting was clumsy and childlike. Dear Miss Laura, please come have dinner with us. We made drawings and cookies. Love, Sophie, and Lily, and Daddy too. Laura pressed the paper to her chest, smiling to herself. She already knew there was no way she could say no. That Sunday, Daniel drove them to a small cottage tucked away on the edge of town. This used to be my mum's place, he explained, as the car crunched over the gravel driveway. I've kept it just the way it was. It's where I come when I don't want to be Daniel Marlowe, CEO. The house was modest, but warm. Flower pots lined the porch, and an old wind chime clinked lazily in the breeze. Inside, the living room walls were covered with crayon drawings, taped proudly in crooked rows. Laura laughed as she stepped inside. You weren't exaggerating about the art gallery. Sophie grabbed her hand. Come sit with me. Dinner was simple. Spaghetti again, by popular demand. Daniel wore a faded apron that read, Kiss the Cook, and pretended not to notice the tomato sauce splattering across his shirt. The girls filled the room with chatter about their favorite books and favorite colors, while Laura listened attentively, passing bread and asking questions. Not once did she glance at her phone. After the meal, Daniel brought out a stack of old board games, while Laura stayed behind to help clean up. As she knelt to tie Sophie's shoe, the little girl's curls bounced forward. Your hair's in your eyes, Laura said gently, brushing Sophie's bangs aside and clipping in a tiny hairpin. Sophie's whole face lit up. Daniel stood in the doorway drying a plate, frozen by the sight. Something shifted in him. The way Sophie looked at Laura, with pure trust, with that unfiltered affection only a child could give, took his breath away. It wasn't forced, it wasn't coached, it was real. I've never seen a child trust me that quickly, Laura said quietly, sitting back on her heels. Daniel's voice was low. And I've never seen anyone make them feel safe so fast. She looked up at him, surprised. I mean it, he continued, setting aside the dish towel. They don't open up to people easily. After Emily passed, they could sense everything. Who was genuine? Who wasn't? You walked into our lives, and it felt like they'd been waiting for you. Laura's eyes glistened. She brushed a hand over her jeans. Half the time, I don't know what I'm doing. I just care. That's exactly what they need, Daniel replied. The twins were curled up together now, heads pressed against one another as they flipped through a picture book. The evening light spilled softly through the curtains. The noise of the outside world, the chaos, the headlines, felt 1,000 miles away. You're different here, Laura whispered. I'm myself here, Daniel admitted, not being chased by headlines, not talking stock projections. She stepped closer. You don't have to prove anything here. Not to them, not to me. He gave a small, almost nervous smile. That's what scares me most, that it's real. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then don't run from it. Daniel looked at her, really looked. past her smile, past the surface. His gaze lingered not out of romance, but gratitude, even awe. Somehow, without even trying, she had already become a part of their small, fragile world. And for the first time in years, that world didn't feel broken. But peace rarely lasts. The photo appeared online on a quiet Tuesday morning. A grainy image snapped through tree branches. Laura holding hands with Sophie and Lily as they skipped down the sidewalk outside the Pine Street Library. Laura was smiling. The girls were laughing. The caption read, "Mystery woman spotted with Marlowe twins. Who is she?" Within hours, her name was trending. By evening, the press had connected the dots. Paparazzi swarmed her small apartment building, camera lenses poked through blinds, microphones shoved in her face when she left for work. Headlines spun, rumors, marriage, scandal, secret children. They shredded her life with no regard for truth. Daniel watched it unravel in real time. His name splashed across the news again, but this time it was tied to someone who had never asked for the spotlight, someone he cared about. He called her phone, again and again. No answer. The next morning at the library, the director called Laura into his office. His expression was weary, apologetic. "There's been pressure," he said, avoiding her eyes. "One of our top donors threatened to pull funding. They don't like the media frenzy. They say it's distracting." Her chest tightened. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," he murmured, "but they don't care about right or wrong, just appearances." She walked out of the library with a cardboard box of her belongings, the whispers of co-workers trailing her like shadows. It had taken her years to build that quiet, steady life. And now, with one careless photograph, it was gone. That night, Laura sat motionless on her couch, the glow of her phone lighting the room. Dozens of messages poured in, numbers she didn't recognize, reporters fishing for quotes, strangers with opinions they felt entitled to share. But one message she read again and again. "Laura, please talk to me. I never saw this coming. Daniel." She couldn't bring herself to reply. The next morning, the chaos arrived at her doorstep. Reporters clogged the sidewalk outside her building, their voices rising in a messy chorus of questions. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A woman down the hall shouted, "Is it true? Are you marrying him?" Then, over the din, a new sound broke through. A car door slamming, heavy footsteps, and the collective hush of a crowd when someone important appears. Daniel Marlowe stood at the bottom of the steps. His tailored coat hung open, hair tousled by the wind. Cameras snapped furiously, but he ignored them all, his eyes fixed only on Laura's door. From the upstairs window, Laura stood frozen, fingers trembling against the curtain. Daniel took one step forward, raised his voice just enough to carry above the chaos. "I can't change the world, Laura," he called, "but I can stand between you and it. I'll take the questions, the cameras, the noise. Just say the word." His voice cracked. "Let me stand with you." She pressed her forehead against the door, her heart pounding. Tears filled her eyes. Her hand hovered over the lock, but she didn't turn it. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You have to protect your daughters. Don't let them get pulled into this mess." "They're already in it," he answered firmly. "Because they've asked for you every night this week. Because they miss you. And so do I." Her sob broke loose. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he said gently. "Neither did we. But somehow, this became the most real thing I've had in years." A long silence stretched between them. The clicking of cameras, the winter wind rattling the street. "I'm sorry," she whispered through the door, "but I need you to go." He stayed a moment longer, nodding slowly, then turned and walked back through the crowd, each step heavy, deliberate. Laura slid down against the door, her back pressed to the wood. The box of her library things sat beside her. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, wished the world would stop spinning. The children's drawing was still taped to her door. Wobbly lines, uneven hearts, and the words, "We miss you, Miss Laura." Sophie had drawn it in purple, and Lily's orange handprint stamped one corner. For 3 days, Laura paused at the doorway, fingertips brushing the paper each time she left, her chest aching. The media frenzy eventually shifted to a new scandal. The noise quieted, but the damage remained. Her job was still gone, her name still whispered online. She told herself it was better this way. Distance, silence, no attachments. And yet every night she dreamed of small hands gripping hers, of messy spaghetti dinners, of laughter echoing in a cottage that had started to feel like home. She missed them, more than she wanted to admit. At Daniel's house, silence had taken root. It was heavier than he'd expected, and the girls noticed most. They didn't understand paparazzi, donations, or public scandal. They only knew one thing. Miss Laura had vanished. On the third night, Lily climbed into his lap before bed, her eyes glossy with confusion. "Daddy, is Miss Laura gone forever?" He brushed away a tear from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. She just needs some time." Sophie's little hand clutched his shirt. "Did we do something wrong?" Daniel's chest tightened painfully. "Not at all. She loves you so much." "Then why didn't she come back?" Lily's voice wavered. He had no answer. The next morning, he found them both at the kitchen table, surrounded by crayons. Their faces were solemn, focused. When they finished, Sophie held up a sheet of paper, 3 stick figures labeled us, with hearts floating above. At the top, they had written in crooked letters, "We bring our hearts." Daniel stared at it for a long time, then stood up. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going to see her." The girls' faces lit up. Sophie clapped. Lily squealed. They dressed quickly. This time, there were no cameras. He took side streets, parked 2 blocks away, and carried the girls to avoid notice. At Laura's door, the old drawing still fluttered in the breeze. Daniel knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Softer. Still silence. He looked at his daughters. "Ready?" They nodded. Sophie reached up and taped their new drawing beneath the old one. Then they both stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the door, arms stretched out, ready for a hug they weren't sure they'd receive. Inside, Laura sat on the floor, surrounded by stacks of books she had been reorganizing just to keep her mind busy. When she heard the knock, she froze. Then came the sound. Soft giggles, the rustle of paper, the unmistakable music of love waiting outside her door. She opened it slowly. There they were, Sophie and Lily, arms wide, eyes shining. No press, no crowd, just hope. "Hi," Sophie whispered. Laura dropped to her knees, arms flinging open, as tears poured down her face. The girls crashed into her embrace, burying their faces in her neck. "I missed you," Laura choked out. So much." Daniel stood quietly behind them, hands deep in his coat pockets. When Laura finally looked up, her eyes rimmed red, he said softly, "I didn't come with headlines. I didn't come with promises. I came with my heart and theirs." Still holding the girls, she asked, "Why did you really come?" Daniel exhaled. "Because I can live without fame, without money, without all the noise. But I can't live without this, without you." The girls squeezed Laura tighter. She closed her eyes, shaking. "I thought I was protecting you by walking away." "You were trying to protect us," Daniel said gently. But leaving wasn't protection. It was just more pain. Laura opened the door wider. Then come in. He stepped forward, the girls still wrapped around her legs. The moment was simple, quiet. No cameras, no flashing lights, just four hearts standing together in a doorway. I don't need anything else, Daniel whispered. Me neither, Laura said, her voice breaking. And this time, no one let go. Life didn't return to what it had been before, but it became something better, different, quieter, more honest. Daniel and Laura began again, not in secret, not with spectacle, but with quiet determination. No staged photographs, no headlines, just walks in the park, story time on the living room floor, grocery runs where Sophie insisted on pushing the cart, and Lily rode inside it, squealing with laughter. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. Laura moved slowly, cautiously, but she stayed, and Daniel let her set the pace. He never rushed, never pushed. The world had already torn her out of her comfort zone once. He refused to be the one to do it again. One evening, he asked gently, "If you could do anything in the world, anything at all, what would it be?" Laura smiled softly. "I'd start a reading program for kids who don't have books at home. For the ones who linger at the back of the library until closing because they don't want to go home." Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Then let's build it." They called it Story Nest, a free mobile reading program that traveled to shelters, schools, and community centers. Laura organized volunteers, picked out books, and read to children with the same warmth she had shown Sophie and Lily the first night they met. Daniel funded it quietly, but never sought credit. He let Laura lead every decision. When reporters called, he declined interviews. Instead, his team released statements about Story Nest's impact. Slowly, the headlines shifted, from the mystery librarian to the program itself. At home, life settled into a rhythm that was beautifully ordinary. Laura stayed for dinner more often, then overnight, when the girls begged. She read them bedtime stories, giving each character a different voice, while Sophie and Lily clung to her arms, pleading for one more page. She taught them how to draw faces with emotions, how to write their own little picture books. Daniel often lingered in the hallway, heart swelling with something deeper than happiness, something that finally felt like home. One night, after a story about a lost bear who found a family in the forest, the girls lay drowsy beneath their blankets. Laura tucked them in, brushing hair from their foreheads. "Miss Laura," Lily whispered, blinking sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? Can I call you Mama Laura?" The room went still. Daniel froze in the doorway, not breathing. Laura's eyes filled instantly. She dropped to her knees, clutching Lily's hand. "If that's what you want, then yes, of course you can." Sophie reached out too, and Laura kissed both their foreheads, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Daniel stepped forward, sat on the edge of the bed, and took Laura's hand in his. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The girls drifted into sleep, still holding her fingers, their faces peaceful. Later that night, after dishes were done and the house had quieted, Daniel and Laura sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, as the old wind chimes swayed in the breeze. "I never wanted to replace anyone," Laura whispered. "You didn't," Daniel said. "You became something entirely your own." She leaned against his shoulder. "I didn't think I had enough to give." "You gave them safety," Daniel said, voice thick. "You gave me a reason to believe again." Laura smiled through her tears. "I guess this just happened." Daniel shook his head gently. "Number, it didn't just happen. We chose this. Every small moment, every quiet decision. We built this together. She nodded, her heart full. In the glow of the porch light, the truth was undeniable. They weren't becoming a family. They already were one. 1 year later, everything had changed, and yet life remained beautifully simple. Laura still lived in her cozy apartment above the bookstore on Pine Street. She had returned to the library not out of need, but out of love. Children still ran into her arms, and her name appeared in quiet stories about Story Nest. But no one called her the CEO's fiancée. She was simply Laura, and that was enough. Daniel never asked her to move into his sprawling estate. He knew she didn't need marble floors. She needed roots. Most of their time was spent at the cottage. Crayons on the walls, the scent of spaghetti in the air, wind chimes singing on the porch. On a soft spring afternoon, they had a picnic in the backyard. Daniel had rebuilt the old table from the night they first met. Worn wood, mismatched chairs and all. "You brought back the wrong table," Laura teased, smiling. "Some mistakes," Daniel said, grinning, "are worth keeping." The girls ran barefoot through the grass, weaving daisy chains, their laughter echoing in the air. After dessert, they disappeared inside, then returned giggling with a tiny box wrapped in napkins. "For you," Sophie announced, dropping it into Laura's lap. Inside lay a ring made from colorful beads strung on soft rope, uneven, imperfect, precious. "We made it," Lily explained proudly. "It's your special ring." Daniel knelt beside Laura, his voice trembling. "I used to believe I'd only be loved for what I had. My name, the money. But then came a wrong table, 2 little girls, and a woman who saw past all of it and just saw me." He took her hand. "I'm not asking for a headline or a grand ceremony. Just this: be yourself with us. Be the heart of this home. Laura Quinn, will you marry me?" Laura laughed through her tears, staring at the handmade ring before slipping it onto her finger. "We've been a family for a while now. You're just catching up." The girls squealed, circling them in hugs and giggles. There were no cameras, no breaking news, only sunlight, laughter, and the sound of 2 children who had unknowingly written the most unexpected love story. That evening, as the sky turned gold, Daniel and Laura sat together on the porch swing, arms wrapped tight. "You weren't the wrong woman," he whispered. "You were the right one. At the table no one expected." "And you were never the billionaire," Laura replied softly. "You were the dad with kind eyes and spaghetti on his shirt." In the stillness of that ordinary day, they began the rest of their lives. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive on time or in the way you imagine. Sometimes it stumbles in softly, sits at the wrong table, and turns your entire world right. Daniel had once tried to guard his heart with wealth. Laura had once feared her small world couldn't hold something as vast as love. But in the end, it wasn't about money or mansions. It was bedtime stories. It was crayon hearts. It was a woman who chose to see the man, not the name,